Okay. If Marcia is here, I think I want to get on the other side then.
Okay. Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce you, and
Okay.
you can set up while we're doing that.
Right, yes.
So, thanks for sticking around, everyone. I'm just helping out because I live nearby, but I met Brad back in the early 2000s.
Right, in Fairbanks.
And we haven't changed a bit, fortunately. None of us have. We all just are ageless, which I love.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but we met up in Fairbanks and, formed a fast friendship. And then Brad had told me that he was going to be traveling to the state, having returned back here just a couple times since 1959. And he was bringing his lovely family with him to show him some of the special places that he enjoyed. What's really fun about this presentation is that, Brad's going to tell some of his stories, but this is an open invitation to have folks share their stories of living in Southeast Alaska or anywhere in Alaska. So if you feel so inspired to share a thought or a memory, just go ahead and wave your hand, and then I'll bring the microphone to you, and you can share your story as well, because that's what this is all about.
That's great.
But Brad, I'm going to let you do further introductions, so thank you.
Okay, let's... Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It was 60 years ago, in 1959, that I first came to Alaska. Let's go to the next picture. Okay. All right. I'll read what I have there. Upon graduation from college in the spring of 1959, I was free for an adventure prior to my marriage to Beverly Balsam in the fall of our move to Dubuque, Iowa, where our son Michael would be born in 1961, and I would graduate from the Dubuque Theological Seminary in 1963. Alaska was in the news. The new 49-star flag was to be raised on the 4th of July in Juneau. While sitting at the desk at the Duluth Bethel Mission registering homeless men for a night's lodging, I applied to the Presbyterian Church to volunteer as a vacation church school teacher in southeastern Alaska. Okay, so that was okay. Okay, so that was 1959 here in Alaska. Who was in Sitka in 1959?
I was.
Yeah.
Right over there, yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you get her story?
Okay.
Yeah.
So Brad has a question. What were you doing here in 1959?
I didn't hear that.
So you were here in 59. What were you doing here in 1959? What brought you here? Were you born here?
My dad was a bookkeeper for a company that we did some logging, and we came up with that, and then he was the start of the sawmill, or the pulp mill, and so the family moved up there. We had 4 girls, so we had a household, and it all turned out very nice.
And here you are today.
Here I am today, and I'm very satisfied with Sitka, so I'm staying here.
Very good. Well, thank you for letting us
We're
know.
going to put Marcia on the spot. Yes.
And this last speaker has said as well, we just couldn't get enough of her clam chowder and a lot of those fundraisers. We're all smiling today because of her. She has years and years of experience, and if you can live through a logging camp, you can live through most anything. And I want to be sure we all thank her for those wonderful food items.
All right. Okay. Let's move on to the next picture.
Oh, that's me.
Okay, on there. All right. There's the front end of the SJS-2, and I don't know how well you can see there, but that's me in the front row of the boat. That was to be my digs for the summer of 1959, along with other volunteers from all over the country. I had just completed orientation at Sitka's Sheldon Jackson College, and we were heading out to teach vacation church school in the Tlingit villages. George Betts, who will figure in this story, is standing right behind me. Now, George Betts is a name that may not be familiar to you. Is there anyone here who has any memory at all of George Betts? Any memory of the person, George Betts?
Reverend George Betts.
And then we've got, I think all of us know who that is.
Yeah. Because
I didn't catch that.
so were you out in Cape? Did you live in Cape? Were you in
Picking
Cape?
up and picking in those.
Do you remember George Betts? What do you remember about him? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, she remembers him. Yeah.
Just to.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
okay.
Getting on this stuff to be a thrower, never to go in a place where I couldn't get on and get off.
Right. Right.
And it was all within the difference here and down a little bit in the north.
Carrie, why don't you repeat what she said, or
Well, I
summarize?
think we're talking about getting on and off a boat.
A what?
We were talking about getting on and off a boat. So I'm not sure I understood what were you saying about getting on and off? It was difficult.
Oh, and in and on the thoughts? Is that what you mean? Go getting on someplace and getting off of it at the same thing, or just what you naturally do?
Okay.
Especially here, I start before early in the day.
Oh,
I
okay.
get there
All right.
early, but I'm always there for when people are doing it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank
Okay,
you. Okay.
all right. Let's move on. There's another picture of the Sheldon Jackson 2. Okay, there's a picture of the Sheldon Jackson number 2. It was built at the school in 1943. It was a 56-foot long boat made of Alaska yellow cedar, Indiana white pine, and Sitka spruce. It was used to net salmon until it was converted to a passenger vessel in the 1950s. It was owned by the school.
I don't like this kid, Ross. I wish I was.
I think she's just talking.
Oh, okay, all right. Let's move on then to a picture of George Betts. George Betts was born in Sitka in September of 1891. His Tlingit name, I'm not able to pronounce. Is there someone here who would know? Marcia, can you pronounce his? Be able
What's the
to.
spelling?
Okay, it's ASXAAK.
No,
Okay.
there's probably someone here that would, but
Uh-huh.
I don't want to mess it up.
Okay.
All right. The translation of his name is among the trees. And his mother's name was Frances, and they referred to her as Fanny in English. She was the daughter of the spirit doctor of her Eagle clan. She was active in the Salvation Army. That was George's mother. George's father, George Betts Sr., was a Methodist, and he was a Scottish gold miner. George attended the Sitka training school, and then he left the school when he was in grade school, and then he left to follow a traditional Tlingit lifestyle. He's shown here wearing an Eagle clan. He told me that he was asked to keep that blanket because there were some people who would take those things and sell them to museums without the permission of their clan. So, okay. Any further thoughts? Yes, Marcia.
if you're talking about regalia, the 1944 fire in Hoona wiped out all of the residents in Hoona. And when we went to visit many, many years later, the regalia had been replaced. But the caretakers of each clan are responsible for that regalia as long as it is part of the clan property. You may have regalia that's not clan property, that's different. But something of that quality, goat's wool, woven into a chilkat blanket, and which there are only few women who can do it today. Each one has a separate pattern, and each one is very special to the clan. But the caretakers told us that if a fire broke out again and the caretaker has the regalia, they burn up with the fire. That's how important their job is, to take care of that regalia forever.
Well, evidently George was one of those people that was entrusted with that sacred blanket, and he was very proud of the fact that he was trusted to keep that. Okay, let's move on to the next picture. Okay, that's a picture of some children in one of the canneries, and we held vacation church school classes in different kinds of villages and canneries, and these children are standing on a boardwalk in front of the cabins. Those were cabins that we sometimes used for classes. The cabins were perched on a mountain side, and you know how it is here. The mountain goes right straight down slides directly down into the water, which is too cold for swimming. The parents worked in the salmon industry. The dads would be out on the seine boats, netting the fish, and the women were working in the canneries. And in 1959, almost all of the labor was provided by the people who lived there. Later on, they imported other laborers, primarily from Japan, to work in the canneries. Is there anyone here who has experience working in the canneries?
I do. What?
Yeah.
Do you have something you want to share about your experience? Good, bad, or indifferent? It's hard work, huh? Indifferent, okay, all right.
I see. Were you on the boat or in the cannery?
Cannery. Oh, actually, I was on the boat and in the cannery.
Both, on the boat and in the canneries, huh? Uh-huh.
In Hungary,
Which did you prefer?
the boat.
You like to be on the boat?
I love to be in the water.
Uh-huh, out on the water. Uh-huh, yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, I too, I really enjoyed being on the boat that particular summer. Okay. While we're looking at that picture, there's an interesting kind of backstory that people have thought about, and that is the question of what was going on. Why was the church teaching the children in the first place? What were they trying to accomplish? And as we were oriented, we were expected to be able to help the children have a better understanding of the Bible stories, and it was a part of having the families be a part of the Christian church. And that put us in conflict with the religion, the native religion of the people who lived there. And so there was a conflict back and forth on that. And sometimes it was helpful and sometimes it wasn't. Marcia, we we had a little bit of a conversation about that. We can get into it more later, but what was your first thoughts about that?
Well, I have a lot of experience with worrying about individuals and families. My background is in family education and working another 16 years at Mount Edgecombe. I found many, many kinds of wonderful children, young men, young ladies, who had all kinds of languages, all kinds of ways of preparing foods. And who was I to say there was one special way to prepare food and one special way to give honor to this great spirit around us? So there are questions of the approach, and because all of the United States was working really hard on making a melting pot, and it also using education to make everybody the same, you might say. And there are some real questions about what cultures have to offer when you wipe out their backgrounds.
Yes, and so that's sort of the dark side of this story, because there was great value in the religious beliefs and traditions of the people who lived here before the Russians and before the Europeans arrived, and that was lost in many different ways. Let's move on to the next picture. And during the week that we were in Angoon, George conducted a funeral for an elderly village woman. Family members sat on one side wearing headbands with the crest of her Raven clan. And friends sat, so the family was on one side in the church, and friends were on the other side wearing the eagle band crest. And George explained to me later that his people thought of themselves more as a part of their clan. So each individual person, the most important part for that individual person was that they were a member of the clan rather than as separate individuals. And they also believed that the boundary between humans and other creatures was permeable. There wasn't all that much difference in their view. And Marsha, George said something to me one time that I've wondered about. We were walking down the road in Hoona, and George pointed out a young child and her mother there, and he turned to me and George said, you see that little girl? Well, the people here believe that she has the spirit, the soul of my mother. He said the people believe that she has the soul of my mother. And I've often wondered about what George was wondered about that. Marsha, what would you make of a statement like that?
Well, I've been working on it about 53 years.
Yes.
I haven't figured it out. Each culture has a worldview, and we kind of dip into that when we talk about, well, you look like your grandmother, or you act like your aunt. We're kind of in some of this Western world thinking, tipping our toes into that kind of thing. But remember, you need to study a lot more about the Tlingit and Sitka and Haida of Southeast Alaska to do a good job to get inside of the worldview and not just look at it from the point of animals and weird sayings. Because I've found over the years the worldview has a lot to offer. The worldview looks at elders as precious. And if you are naming someone in the clan after someone special, that's very important, and a lot of the Western world does that also. They take names to remember them. My Tlingit name is Lady in the Grass because I am a frog. And I was adopted by the Kiksati. And if I were leading this group from the beginning, I would say, welcome neighbors to our land. This is Kiksati land. It was never sold, it was never given to the Russians. So we have a lot of studying to do, but the value I see in the care that's taken in valuing the next generation by valuing the old one is very, very important.
Thank you, thank you. There's another story that George told me. See, he was a minister of 2 or 3 of the villages, and in one of the villages there were refugees from the Aleutian Islands. There was one small village in the Aleutian Islands that the Navy believed that it was at risk for being conquered by the Japanese during the Second World War. And so they took all of those people in that little town, way, way, way out in the end of the Aleutian Islands, and they brought them back and they settled them in an old abandoned cannery near Angoon. And of course, they didn't know how to live there. And so they were in desperate shape. And George and his wife, when he was a minister there, they took in some of the children and they helped some of the families because they were refugees. They had been taken away and then they had been essentially neglected and ignored by the government after they were relocated there. So our history of neglecting immigrants, neglecting refugees is all over the place, and that is just one more example of that kind of situation. Okay, let's go on to the next picture. So on the evening of July 3rd, 1959, we left Angoon after dinner on the evening of the 3rd to make the overnight run to Juneau. Sunset was at 10 p.m. and sunrise was at 4 a.m. An occasional whale sounded ahead of us, their white plumes catching the morning sun. Our summer crew, when we got to Juneau, our summer crew greeted us and we walked over to the library. We were in a crowd of 3,000 people in Juneau on July 4th. We all cheered and we took pictures as the flag was being raised. Then we watched the parade, which featured a float decorated as a war canoe, loaded with men chanting a war chant, dressed in ancestral garb. We finished off the day with a visit to the Red Dog Saloon, and we got a certificate saying that we had been there. So, was there anyone here who was in Juneau on July 4th, 1959? Anybody here who was in Juneau on July 4th, 1959? No? No takers, huh? I didn't catch that.
He was born in Juneau.
You were born there?
He left in 59 to go to Seattle.
Okay. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
Picture there you want to share? Oh, it's a picture of his mother, who lived to a healthy age of 97, it looks like. Oh, okay, so you moved from Juneau. Oh, okay, so you needed to leave, yeah. You needed to leave Juneau and move to Seattle. So she wanted to come back to Alaska as her last wish. You graduated from Ballard High School in Seattle. Yeah. Wonderful, and then came back. Okay. Came back to bring Mom back so she could be here, but not Juneau. So you came to Sitka. Brought Mom to Sitka. Little brother got out of the Navy and moved to Sitka. And had a big family, got married here. So. Wonderful. Thank you for telling us that.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right. Okay, let's move to the next picture. It's of the same children. It's my favorite picture, so I wanted to show it a second time. Our next stop was Chatham, where George organized a crew to pull up stumps to make a playground for the children. One afternoon, George and I went for a walk along a stream to a meadow, where we found an abandoned farmstead. Now, being a farm kid myself, I could see that the soil was too thin and the tillable area was too small there to support a family. And even though it was fairly early in the season, we saw salmon using their tails to dig out the spawning beds in the gravel stream bed. Yesterday, I took a bike ride over in the park, and I went. There's a walking bridge across the creek, and the creek was almost completely filled with salmon going up. About half of the width of the creek. They were just so crowded that it seemed as though it was a solid mass on half of the stream. Going up along the national park. So the salmon run has started, as some of you know. Okay, let's move on to the next picture. There's that young man, 22 years old. The Johnsons, he was the minister there in Angoon, took us out fishing. The surf was teeming with Dolly Varden trout, and as soon as I cast a line, a fish struck the lure. Mrs. Johnson started a fire. She filleted 3 of the fish, and they roasted them over the open fire. It was delicious. Then On August 2nd, we sailed away from Hoona to Rainbow Glacier Camp. The camp comprised of 50. Rainbow Glacier Camp was north of Haines. It had 50 acres of coastline, and it was set up as a summer camp for children all over southeastern. It was opened in 1941 by the Presbytery of Alaska. Well, let's move on to the next picture. There's the picture of our crew. What had happened is that the dining room at the Rainbow Glacier Camp had burned down the winter before that summer. And so we were there to start the construction of a new dining hall at Rainbow Glacier Camp. And we were right near a glacier that was emptying into the bay. And sometimes a huge piece would shear off and fall into the water. There would be a booming sound coming across the bay. And then, of course, the whales would come in very, very close, and we could hear them as well as see them. Yes.
Marjorie, are you still here? I'm sure you've been to that camp. How many times?
Did I go?
Yeah.
Probably 5 or 6 times as a camper, and then 3 or 4 times as a counselor. And then I also did the camp that was on the edge.
She's the one you got asked about the camp, because, when I arrived after you did, a year after, that dining hall was just beautiful. It was wonderful. But I didn't know when I signed up to teach school at Sheldon Jackson that I didn't get a summer vacation. Sheldon Jackson believes in hard work and all the time. But they said, we do help out with camp north of Haines. And I said, I'll sign up. So I was camp counselor, Marjorie, for that 1 year. But it's set in a setting that across from the water are 2 glaciers sitting on the mountainside. And they're just, everything is geared to praising God every minute.
So you got to be camp counselor. Yes. Well, I got to help build it. I'm there in the middle of all that picture. There were 17 of us all together, if I'm counting right. And I had one accident while I was working there. I was using a little bow saw. A little saw that's about 3 feet long, and while I was sawing on something, the blade jumped out and I cut my thumb, and I still have a scar on my thumb from that accident. So I carry in my body a memory of that summer at Rainbow Glacier Camp. So that was the end of it. We went into Haines. We visited the chapel at Haines. It's a chapel. At the end, behind the pulpit, is all glass, and you look out behind the pulpit to a glacier across the lake. That's the chapel at Haines. Has everybody ever been to that chapel in Haines? Okay, you have. Have her, Gary, have her tell a story of being there.
Well, that's my wife Jenny over there. We were campground hosts at Chilkat State Park, which is right next to the Rainbow Glacier Camp. And we attended the Presbyterian Church there in Haines. And you're right, it's absolutely gorgeous view.
What years was that?
That was 2006 through 2010, so not all that long ago. And we have some friends there, Charlene and Jay Tate. They were counselors for many years at Rainbow Glacier. And one year they asked if they could spend the winter there. And they said, well, yeah, I guess you could. Well, and I can remember Charlene, and she still lives, Jay's no longer here, but Charlene still lives in Haines. She's 92. And she said it was so cold because those old buildings didn't have any insulation. They would have to wear their gloves because the silverware would stick to their hands. It was so that's how cold it was. But they spent the winter there, down at Rainbow Glacier, back in, I don't know, it was probably in the early 90s. So anyway, gorgeous, gorgeous area. Lots and lots and lots of kids have been through there.
Right.
That's for
Yes,
sure.
yes.
Ask Marjorie about her whole experience.
Carrie, Marcia has an idea.
Okay,
Ask Marjorie about her memory.
all right. You can run, but you can't.
Because we're talking about rainbow.
Right here.
I don't know how memorable my experiences are, but it was a place where God touched children. Hank Hartman was the main pastor there when I was there, and Ken Smith were also very involved. And the lives of, there was no native or white there. We were just all Southeast kids. And the years that we went to Rainbow Glacier via the SJS-2 or the Anna Jacqueline were actually some of the best years, because you got to camp and you already knew everybody except the kids from Haines and Skagway. And so it was just great. Just loved it.
You were talking about that building being cold in the winter. It never occurred, I never thought about it. But now that you mention it, of course, there was just one wall of siding. There was, of course, no, it was a summer camp. Come on, it was a summer camp, you know? It was just a wall, probably plywood. I don't remember that part. It was probably just plywood going up the sides, and not a place to be in the wintertime. Okay, well, let's move to the last picture. It's a picture of me looking at the mountain. One of the things that I've noticed here 60 years later is that there's no snow on the top of the mountains. You see that mountain? There was snow up there in the summertime of 1959. And there were glaciers coming down. We would see glaciers quite a lot, running back and forth. I got as far south as I actually didn't spend any time in Ketchikan. The furthest south we got to do any teaching for myself was Wrangell and Petersburg. But from Sitka, at least from Sitka north in 1959, there were glaciers coming right down to the water. And are there still glaciers coming down to the water someplace here in southeastern? There still are?
Yeah.
Okay. Whereabouts?
Glacier Bay.
Glacier Bay?
Juneau.
Oh, near Juneau. Oh, the Mendenhall. Of course, the Mendenhall. Even, it has receded, no doubt, in the 60 years.
Yeah.
But of course, it's still there. Yeah. Well, that's the last picture. And I ask myself the question, why do this? You know? Why come back to some place after 60 years? I mean, think about it, you know? Think about those of you here of a certain age. You know, what were you doing 60 years ago? And to think of all that's happened. And then, so I tried to put it, Marcia,
I got an idea, just.
oh, you go, okay, let me finish my little thing, and then we'll turn it over to you, Marcia, because I'm curious about what you think about 60 years going back. But anyway, I thought there was several different kinds of things that I wanted to write, and thinking about why do this? Why come back to Sitka after 60 years? So this is what I wrote.
Yes, you do.
I wrote, there seems to be something in us. There seems to be something in us that yearns to travel, to explore the different, perhaps the exotic. There is a vitality in that yearning that keeps us on the move. Yet at the same time, we yearn for home. We yearn for home. One wonders, what was at work when our ancestors decided to move out of Northeast Africa some 200,000 years ago? 200,000 years ago, our ancestors moved out of Northeast Africa. Why did they do that? And what about the people that stayed? Why did they stay? And okay, then I'm finished. So one last thought about that is, when you think about it, in your life, why did you move when you moved? And why did you stay when you decided to stay? Because we've all done that. We've all moved. And we've all stayed. Curious. So anyway, why have I come to southeastern Alaska after 60 years? In a sense, this visit to these islands is a marker of significant points in my life. The beginnings of my adult life. We were just getting started, Marcia. Freshly minted college graduates. Having finished college and now here we are, 60 years later, we're nearing the ending of our adult life. So this was a return, a vacation trip with my son and my grandchildren. My son had to go back. He was with us for a while. I want to have my grandchildren stand and be recognized. Everybody up. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. Okay. Marcia, you have something on the tip of your tongue.
Well, I'd like Carrie to interview someone who has returned 28 times
Okay.
and more. And then she has a friend that's been back many times, but she's the record in the room that I know of.
Okay.
28 times.
Put somebody on the spot.
Henrietta, right there.
Okay, somebody who's giggling over here, Henrietta. So, do you want to tell us your journey of coming back again and again?
Well, first of all, I graduated from college in '59 also.
All right,
So I've
another
been-
one.
I've
You
been
should have been
sitting-
up here.
I've been sitting here thinking about my life and why I stayed and when I moved, and it was always for a different job. My first job was in a rural county near where Marcia was raised, and I left because I got to go to graduate school. And then I graduated, went to Cedar Rapids, which was a city, a really big city for me, but then had an opportunity for a job in Washington State. And that's where I became a Presbyterian, which in the end brought me to Sitka. And I was there for 5 years, and then what was my opportunity? Oh, then I had an opportunity to go back to Iowa, where, again, for a good job, and was there for 22 years. And then we had a farm crisis, which changed a lot of lives, and mine was changed in that my job sort of disappeared in the way it had been, and so then I moved to Reno for another good job. And after that, I was able to retire. But during that time, I came on a trip to see the churches and missions in Alaska. And we ended that trip in Sitka to see Sheldon Jackson, of course. And I had a friend who was a volunteer in mission that I had known previously. And she said, when you get old enough to retire, this is the thing you ought to do. And I had always wanted to at least visit Alaska. I hadn't thought that much about living here for any period of time, but I thought about it, and in those days it was a big deal to apply to be a volunteer in mission. It was like applying for a job, all the recommendations, et cetera, et cetera. And so in '91, I came to be the secretary to the president. And when I got here, I said, you know, I've never been a secretary, but I've had a lot of good secretaries because of the positions I held. And fortunately, I knew how to type, and by that time I was using a personal computer, and of course I knew how to use the telephone, and knew how I liked secretaries to help me, and so I tried to be that to him, and it worked really well. And because I always feel it's because I had the beginning stages of learning how to use a personal computer that I was valuable to this school, because before that they had used the big AS400, and that just wasn't suitable for what we needed to do. So anyhow, I stayed here for about 10 years doing different jobs. After a while, the president thought he needed to, I could never figure it out, but wanted to hire a secretary rather than to have a volunteer. And I've decided, as I've looked back over the years that I've been here, I've been replaced several times by people being paid to do the work rather than as a volunteer. And I think people supervising volunteers sometimes feel that volunteers are independent. And I guess maybe I am to a certain point. So anyhow, that is what happened. I've held many positions at Sheldon Jackson. And then I'd leave for a bit because people would say, you know, you really need to get a different experience, see another school. And there are several schools around the United States that volunteers do work at. So I have worked in North Carolina and Albuquerque in New Mexico. But I do always want to come back here. And one of the big drawing cards through the years has been the Sitka Summer Music Festival. So I always came back in June, and when I wasn't working at the college, I would stay with Betty DeChico, who now lives here. She would put me up, and then in the process, I'd find something useful to do. And the summer that I think is my best example of that was when the college closed. They still had the hatchery and all those baby salmon. And those babies needed to be fed. So I walked over to the college, and there was a man there who was volunteering because he also knew those babies needed to be fed, and he was feeding them. And I said, "Do you think that you could teach me to do this?" And of course he could. So he showed me the different feed for the different ages of the babies, and so that was my job that summer, to go feed those baby fish, which was fun. And I've done other things, and then when the Fine Arts Camp was able to move onto the campus, I asked, is there something I can do to help? And of course there's lots to do. And so very soon I became the volunteer that came back every year. And so that's what I'm doing now, and enjoying it. But I come for the job at the college, but I also come because this is what makes me cry. This is a really wonderful community. And I'm sorry our church is closed, but there are still wonderful people here that have lots of churches to go to. So that's not going to mean I can't come anymore. And I love being here. Thank you. And Marsh has been a big help in getting me around town. I'm getting older. I graduated in '59, of course. And so occasionally she gives me a ride when I need it, especially. Thank you, Marcia.
All right. Let's give her a hand. All right. Okay. So, Marcia, last words. I keep putting her on the spot, right?
Tell us how you came here.
We
I'm
had Presbyterian pastors on many
Thank you very
college
much. Thank you.
campuses.
Right. Yes.
And I grew up a Presbyterian, so while I was on campus, I went to the Presbyterian house around campus with the Methodist house and the Lutherans and Catholics, and Presbyterians had a pastor also. And that pastor was just on his toes, you know. How I got to Sitka was that he said, you know, you juniors and seniors out here in Bible study, don't you need a job pretty soon? And he said, I'm going to take a busload of people to Columbus, Ohio, where there are colleges, schools, mission fields that need workers. And I'd like you to just talk to some of them. Just give it a try. And on the bus I was, and in Columbus I was, and it was like a, you know, a fair, table set up. This man in a fur parka has postcards of Sheldon Jackson College, of the brown buildings on the green hill and the blue ocean. I had spent 21 years in Iowa with farms as level you can see forever. And I just couldn't get that picture out of my mind and did decide to apply. And I've been here ever since. I kept bumping into, as you do, single people on the job. And there were about 6 of us who, you know, what do you do on the weekend when you do get a few hours off? Well, let's run up that mountain over there, or let's jump on a boat somewhere. And the question was, did any of us ever been up on that mountain? And somebody with wisdom said, well, don't you know someone who could take us? And I kept bumping into this young man until a year and a half later we started our family. And I've been here ever since, except when the Mount Ashcombe School closed. I did work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And in those days we were flying 1,000 high schoolers out of state. So there were no schools in the villages for high schoolers in some villages. There was a great need, but who knew that the oil boom would bring us lots of questions and lots of answers. But the journey has been one of the most wonderful things you could ever expect. And thank you for listening. I'm sure you have some stories out there just as wonderful. I'd like to hear some of them. Went around the room and said, how did you get here? I bet we'd have fun.
When Marcia and I were talking yesterday, and yesterday was the first time we had a conversation. We've just recently been, thanks to Kari for putting us in touch. But we were saying that we're going to have to put a cork in it, because each one of us in this room have stories long enough that we could be here all night telling each other our stories. Well, thank you very much, dear friends, for your attention while we have been telling our stories.
My granddaughter's husband has a tavern up there, and they live up there half the time.
They live up there half the time. Well, good for them. Okay, and Dan, thank you for the technical help. Appreciate your coming and doing that. And Sky for putting all this together. I think we're done.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking a vacation to come back to Sitka and share all this wonderful information with us.
What a pleasure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good discussion. Everyone enjoyed that.
Okay. Well.